In Magic the Gathering, Unicorn is a predominantly white creature type. It's a type that's as old as Magic itself, as it first appeared on Pearl Unicorn in Limited Edition Alpha. It's a type that has returned with regularity since then, although it's also never been a creature type that gets an insane amount of support or anything either, although the printing of MEL in 2020 did finally give them a typal payoff. Magic's unicorns are of course based on the unicorns that appear in real-world folklore, where they are often depicted as representations of purity that are capable of healing people and often assist others with pure hearts. As such, they do have a fairly cohesive mechanical identity that reflects this. They typically appear as horses with a single horn that often have the ability to heal, augment, or protect creatures or players. To be eligible for this list, a card had to have the unicorn type or be capable of making a unicorn creature token. In all, there were 35 cards eligible, and in this video we'll look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic the Gathering. This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you want Magic singles or sealed product, use my link in the description. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I rank cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes regional championships. At number 10, it's Daybreak Charger. For 1 generic and a white, it's a 3/1, and when it enters, target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. It's definitely not the most exciting thing ever, but if you're an aggro deck that likes to curve out, playing this on turn 2 to buff your 1-drop feels pretty good, especially when you're getting a reasonably aggressive body to go along with it. Daybreak Charger saw a little bit of play in standard white weenie decks, but it doesn't have any top 8 since 2020. At number 9, it's Wishmonger. You may have noticed that this doesn't actually say Unicorn on the type line, but when they went about standardizing creature types in 2007, they went back and made this a Unicorn Monger for obvious reasons. Anyway, it's 3 generic and a white for a 3/3, and any player can pay 2 generic to give target creature protection from the controller's choice until end of turn. In Mercadian Masks, there's a whole cycle of these Mongers, who all have a color-appropriate ability anyone can use, and Wishmonger is the only one that saw competitive play. It achieved its 1 top 8 at Pro Tour New York in 2000, an event famous for the utter dominance of mono-white Rebel decks. These decks were all about using Rebels and their activated abilities to recruit other Rebels to the battlefield. Travis Turning put a Wishmonger in the sideboard of his Rebel deck because his was more creature dense than anyone else's, and he reasoned that he'd be able to take more advantage of protection than other Rebel decks, as he'd have more creatures to send through unblocked. However, this Unicorn Monger has never achieved another top 8. At number 8, it's Splendor Mare, which is an elk unicorn, interestingly. It still has 1 horn, but also some antlers. Anyway, for 2 generic and a white, it's a 3/3 with lifelink, and it has cycling for 1 generic and a white, which means you can pay that cost and discard it from your hand to draw a card. And when you cycle Splendor Mare, you get a lifelink counter on target creature you control. A 3-mana 3/3 with lifelink isn't terrible, and the fact you can use this to dig deeper in your deck while also augmenting one of your creatures is some nice upside to have, especially in a deck that has payoffs for cycling, which are the exact kind of decks the Mare saw play in while it was in Standard. One of the deck's payoffs was Drannith's Stinger, and giving it lifelink was particularly spicy because you'd get a life every time it pinged your opponent. However, Splendor Mare wasn't a fixture in cycling decks, and it doesn't have any top 8 since 2020, so it's another unicorn that will likely lose its spot on the list in the long run. At number 7, it's Nyxborn Unicorn. For 1 generic and a white, it's a 2/2 enchantment creature with Mentor, which means that when it attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature with lesser power. It also has Bestow, which is an alternate casting cost that lets you cast it as an aura spell. In this case, it costs 3 generic and a white, and it gives the enchanted creature +2/+2 in Mentor. So, dropping this on turn 2 feels fine, especially if you played a 1-drop, and later in the game, when a 2-drop is less relevant, you can cast it as an enchantment. And remember, if the creature you bestow it onto dies, the unicorn sticks around on the battlefield as a creature, so there are some real benefits to doing that. Nyxborn Unicorn is from Modern Horizons 3, and because of that, the only 60-card formats it's legal in are Modern, Legacy, Vintage, and because it's common, Pauper, and that's a format where only commons are legal, and it's also the format where this unicorn has put up top 8s in white weenie decks. However, so far in 2025, it doesn't have any top 8s. At number 6, it's Benevolent Unicorn. For 1 generic and a white, it's a 1/2, and whenever a spell would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals that much damage -1 to that permanent instead. This is a pretty sweet damage prevention effect because it's on such a cheap creature, even if it does only count spells that do damage. It has seen play in Pauper sideboards because small creature decks often have to contend with the opponent citing in Electrickery and similar effects, and the Unicorn gives those decks a way to completely blank that type of effect. However, it's another inactive Unicorn, with its last top 8 coming in 2023. At number 5, it's Seraphic Steed. For a green and a white, it's a Unicorn mount with First Strike and Lifelink, and if it attacks while saddled, you make a 3/3 White Angel creature token with flying, and you can mount it with its last ability, Saddle 4, which means you can tap any number of other creatures you control with power 4 or more, and the steed becomes saddled until end of turn, but you can only do it as a sorcery. So a 2-mana 2/2 with First Strike and Lifelink is a quality creature that is really difficult to interact with in the early game, and is likely to gain the player who controls it a significant amount of life before combat becomes difficult for the steed. And when that happens, you can think about saddling it to get yourself a 3/3 flyer, and then even if the steed dies at that point, you're left with a body that is very relevant in most cases. It's of course even nastier if the player who controls the steed can keep it alive and saddle it. The Steed's top 8s have all come in Standard, a format it's legal in right now, where it tends to be played in Selesnya aggro decks, which feature a hefty token theme. These decks also possess 2 cards that can help you easily saddle the Steed even on turn 3, like Toby Beastie Befriender and Sandstorm Salvager. Seraphic Steed is still active in Standard right now, and it has a very good chance to move higher on this list, as most of the cards ahead of it have only a modest lead and most of them aren't as active as it is. At number 4, it's Celestial Unicorn. For 2 generic and a white, it's a 3/2 that gets a +1/+1 counter anytime you gain life. It might cost 1 more than a Johnny's Pridemate, who has the same trigger, but it also comes with 1 more power. Celestial Unicorn, like the Pridemate, can grow quite rapidly in decks with enough life gain, and it represents a very real threat to your opponent in those situations. Its top 8s have all come in Pauper, and as you'd expect, it's been played in decks that are good at gaining life. In particular, the white weenie decks that run lots of creatures with life gain triggers, like Soul Warden and Lunarch Veteran. With those 2 around, the Unicorn often grows multiple times a turn. However, Celestial Unicorn is inactive and hasn't put up any top 8 since 2024. At number 3, it's Steadfast Unicorn. For 1 white mana, it's a 1/2, and you can pay 3 generic and a white to give all your creatures +1/+1 in Vigilance until end of turn, and you can only activate that ability during your turn. This activated ability is significantly cheaper than most other creatures who have board pump effects. The going rate is usually 5 or so mana, especially on a creature this cheap. Offering Vigilance is no small thing either, as sometimes, to really take advantage of a board pump effect, you have to put yourself at risk on the backswing. That's not really the case here. The Unicorn is from a Commander set, so the only 60-card formats it's legal in are Modern, Legacy, Vintage, and Pauper. It has quickly established itself as an important card in Pauper white weenie decks, which can go wide in a hurry thanks to cards like Battle Screech, so the board pump effect is often lethal. It's still active in Pauper right now, and is likely to be the number 2 card on the list someday. I just told you about a Unicorn that's steadfast. Well, I'm steadfast too, in my desire to hit 100,000 subscribers before the year is out. So if you aren't subscribed, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. It's free and it will keep you aware of my regular Magic content. And even if you think you're already subscribed, do me a favor and double check because more than half of my viewers are unsubscribed. At number 2, it's Ronom Unicorn. For 1 generic and a white, it's a 2/2 and you can sacrifice it to destroy target enchantment. These kind of cards always end up being sneaky good. That is, a 2-drop with okay stats that also gives you a way to hate on a permanent type that isn't normally that easy to get rid of. It means you can play a card like this in your main deck in a white aggro deck without feeling terrible about it, even against opponents with very few targets, while still maintaining access to this effect in Game 1 against the decks it's really good against. It put up top 8s in Standard at Worlds in 2006, but it ultimately made a longer-term impact on Extended, where it regularly appeared in Zoo decks through 2008. This was a format that featured the enchantment-heavy Enduring Ideal deck and lots of other powerful and heavily played enchantments, including Pernicious Deed and Heartbeat of Spring. However, Ronom Unicorn doesn't have any top 8 since 2008, and it's likely to be surpassed by some of the other unicorns on the list that are still active. And at number 1, it's Regal Bunnicorn. For 1 generic and a white, it's a rabbit unicorn with power and toughness, each equal to the number of non-land permanents you control. Yeah, this rabbit unicorn has a potential to be absolutely massive. Although if your only permanents are creatures, you aren't quite doing enough to unlock the Bunnicorn's full potential. But there are decks in both Standard and Pioneer that are doing that. The key is to have lots of cards that create multiple permanents really efficiently, like the 1-mana Novice Inspector and Spyglass Siren, which appear alongside the Bunnicorn in both Standard and Pioneer. In both formats, it tends to be played in decks with either Artifact or Convoke sub-themes that can leverage all of those permanents for even more advantage on things like Convoke or Warden of the Inner Sky's activated ability. These Regal Bunnicorn decks have slowed down a little bit of late, but the recent printing of Lumen-class Frigate seems to have empowered them a bit, and either way, the Bunnicorn isn't done putting up top 8s in Standard and Pioneer. It just ends up being way too efficient in this style of deck, basically feeling like Tarmogoyf. So it's fairly likely to hold on to its number 1 spot on this list going forward. So those are Magic's best unicorns. If you're looking to build a unicorn deck, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to catch up on past videos, including many more that look at creature types, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.